Hello and welcome back to Shoogly Chef Motors. We're going to start putting the CB250RS engine back together. So as you saw in the last episode, obviously I sort of prepped and cleaned and painted all the engine casings, which have now cured, and it's time to start reassembling. Still waiting for the barrel to come back from the machine shop, but we'll hopefully get that back in the next couple of days, and then the top end will go together as well. But yeah, first things first, bottom up, we've got to start at the crankcase, all the gearbox components, kickstart, things like that, all need to get fitted. I've got my little engine stand mocked up to make this a little bit easier. So yeah, not much more to say than to just start putting parts back in the casings. So first thing going in is the kickstart anchor pin and stopper plate. There we go, it's a kickstart shaft, spring retaining circlip, so that kickstart operates as it should with the ratchet. It's quite unusual for a kickstart mechanism to be so well encased, so you want to get this right, because if this doesn't operate correctly, one, the bike can't start, but two, you'd have to strip the engine back down to fix it. So making sure this is right at this stage is prudent. So next up is the selector drum, which goes in to the casing like that. I've lubricated the bearings with assembly oil, and then there's a retainer plate with 2 screws that goes on the outside. So just cleaning the screws with a wee bit of brake cleaner, blowing them dry, and then I'll use a thread lock on them when they go in. Up nice and tight. So next up is my selector forks, keeping them well lubricated, and these need to line up in their corresponding grooves in the selector drum. Now this is the second shaft that goes in. Needs to locate with the forks, like so. I didn't realise the camera turned off there, but all I've done there is fitted the neutral contact switch and the little detent stopper arm under here. And next to go on is the gear selector shaft. Next thing I'm putting in is the output shaft of the gearbox, and I'm putting on a fresh oil seal as well, which goes on the end here, like so. Okay, unfortunately I ran out of battery in my camera, and as with all things, it didn't have a charged one, so I had to charge it up, and then I ran out of time. Yeah, so as I was saying, I fitted the output shaft that goes to the sprocket. I've now also fitted the input shaft, which goes to the clutch, and in turn, obviously, the crankshaft, the power from the engine. Speaking of crankshafts, that's the next thing to go in. The crank on this engine is basically 2 big roller bearings either side, 2 big crank lobes, webs, sorry, and then a con rod in the middle. I've done some measurements and it all seems within spec, so hopefully that'll just go straight in without any issues. The other thing to contend with is this chain here runs a balance shaft, and this thing here. Because it's a big single cylinder, to try and reduce some of the vibration, you've got a balance shaft. So as this weight spins, so does another weight on the end of the input shaft there, and they kind of counter each other. And as the sort of centrifugal force created by them spinning counteracts the force of the piston going up and down the barrel. It just reduces the vibration. I know you can actually delete these shafts, but I think the engine becomes quite vibration-y, funnily enough. So I'm not going to be getting rid of that. It's a bit tricky because the balance shaft here fits in the upper half of the lower casings, whereas the crank and the input shaft both fit in the lower. So this chain also needs to be timed. It needs to be on the correct teeth of the sprockets on each of these shafts, so that those weights spin at the correct time with the crankshaft. Yes, it's a wee bit complicated to kind of assemble, but once it's all together, it hopefully shouldn't. Well, it should hopefully reduce the vibrations of the engine. Basically, it's a lot of work for it, but Honda designed it like this, and my unhallowed hands won't be trying to change their designs. I'm going to put a bit of assembly lube into the bearings on each side. Just for fun. This side has the half moon bearing retainer, so I'm going to make sure that when it goes in, it does indeed seat into the bearing retainer, and the bearing seats squarely like that. Right, so this chain that I was talking about, it's got white painted marks on some of the links. There's the first link, a 9th link, and a 27th link. So that's your first, your 9th, and then the 27th is actually in here, aligned with an alignment mark on that balancer. The next thing is that the 9th link, which is this one, aligns with, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a tiny dot on the crankshaft there. So you need to make sure that goes on the correct one. Which it does. So that's effectively the crank and the webs on the crank balanced with the rear, or timed I should say, with the rear balancer shaft. And then, like I said, the tricky bit is getting the front balancer shaft in, because it's in the upper crankcase. So coming over then to the upper crankcase, I'm just going to put some assembly lube on the casing, which will help slide it in. On this side as well. And then the balancer shaft basically slides in to these holes here. It's quite a snug machine fit. Like that. And then there's a thrust washer on that side. And then we've got a sprocket and a circlip to go on this side. Sprocket, obviously, because it's going onto that timing chain, again, it's got a tiny little mark there. I don't know if it shows up in the camera, but that needs to be aligned with the mark on the balance shaft, which is down there. Like that. So that's aligned. And then on goes my circlip. Like that. Okay, so everything's now in position in the lower half, and obviously the balancer's in the upper. So the last thing to do is to put in some silicone gasket joining. Thin smear of it all the way around. It's quite critical not to overdo this stuff, because when the halves come together, excess gets pushed out. And if that excess hardens into a lump, gets into your oil, and causes obstructions, starvation, things like that. And then you have issues on your hands. Okay, so this is the top half to go on. Now this dot on the balancer shaft needs to be aligned with this sprocket. Spin it around and find that dot. What I'm going to do is remove this circlip again and take this sprocket off. And that will allow me to line this up better, I think. So, there's my dot there. And then line that dot up. Like that. That's my circlip on. Balancer shaft locked into place. Now I can push the casings together. next thing is to put in the casing bolts, which I have conveniently kept here. Trying to remember where they all went. Right, so just spinning down the crankcase bolts for the top half, which have got to be tightened in sequence. So they're all just sort of finger tight. The 8mm at the back here is going to 28 Newton meters, which is what I've got my torque wrench set to. So it's 28. Yep, good. And then the 10mm are all going to 14 Newton meters, I should say. So slacken that off, wind it down to 14 Newton meters. So 1, 2, so that's the top one's done. Now I need to put the casing bolts in from underneath and torque them up as well. Alright, so I'm just fitting this chain guide for that balancer chain, and then on the other side there's a tensioner. Now the front balancer is in an eccentric shaft, the one that we pushed into the upper crankcase, which means that as you kind of turn it, it tensions the chain up. So if I show you at this side, see how slack the chain is? And then if I would take that shaft, see that chain go tight? So once again, slack chain, tight chain. The spring goes on the adjuster plate onto the little nubbin at the bottom that's part of the casing. So that basically wants to pull it tighter. So once that spring is on, there's a bolt and a washer to go in. So there's lines on the adjuster plate. You have to let it go, obviously, as tight as it can onto the spring, which holds the chain pretty darn taut, and then you have to push it back one line and then tighten the bolt, and that should set the tension on the other side to the correct tension. So now that I'm happy with that tension, to torque this bolt. Holds it nice and tight. That means that the crankshaft still moves freely, but that chain on the other side is tensioned correctly. Right, let's talk about oil pumps. So the oil pump that came out of the engine was this one. Now I don't know if you can kind of tell, but there's quite a lot of metallic grit in that. And when you look at the internals for the oil pump, they are completely trashed. So what's happened is, like I'd kind of feared before, is that when that engine failure happened, wee bits of aluminium or steel or whatever has gone into the oil and into the oil pump, and it has ground away the inside of the oil pump. So I don't know if you'll be able to hear that. It's proper gritty, but I'll show you a close-up of what that surface looks like. So I'm not sure how well it'll come up on camera, but hopefully you can see the pitting and scarring in the lobes of the sort of inner of the oil pump, and then possibly even harder to see, get a torch, the inside of that. The best way to show this is really, I don't know if you can see that, but the inside of that part of the oil pump is scored really badly. So what's happened is it's basically been dragging chunks of metal around inside it and just ground itself to death. So that is scrap now. But as luck would have it, obviously I got that big job lot of parts, and in that came 3 oil pumps. So what I've done is I've stripped down 2 of them, had a look at the internals, and found the best set of internals. One of them has a little bit of scoring, but really not bad actually. Pretty polished. Heck of a lot better than that one. But the other one is more or less immaculate. So what I've done is I've reassembled that one, cleaned it all out, put some assembly fluid inside it, which kind of primes it. The assembly fluid's quite thick. It's a lot thicker than your regular oil, so that will hopefully help build up oil pressure a lot quicker when the engine starts. If you look, these are the galleys, so oil will get pumped basically in through the pump and out the other one. That'll keep the oil circulating. So if I put a decent amount of assembly fluid into there, and I turn the pump round, you'll see it starting to come out the bottom galley. See that? Don't know how obvious that was. I'll spin it back the way. I'll reverse the process. Let's see the oil coming up to the top one. So if I spin it round, it's starting to come out the bottom one again. The assembly fluid's obviously a lot thicker than regular oil, so it doesn't, build up that kind of flow. But that basically gives you an idea that the oil pump's working, and that, is in keeping with my inspection of it and seeing that it's nice and polished. There's also a procedure where you get feeler gauges and check the lobes just for wear, so that all checks out nicely. So let's get this fitted up. Alright, so I've just squirted a bit of oil from an oil can into the galleys, and I've fitted new O-rings. Now the oil pump can go on, so the top part will slide on to one of the selector shafts, and the bottom part will go into a dowel hole here. So put that on there. Like that. Beautiful. So next to go on is the oil pump idler pinion, which goes onto the selector fork shaft. Get it to marry up with the gear. Like that. This shaft has an oil way in it, and it feeds the gearbox. So to make sure that that is in the right position, this retainer plate goes on like that, and this needs rotated so that the plate basically lines up with the holes and holds it in position like that. Now that's in position, we can put in the retaining bolts. Yeah, nice and snug. And check that still moves nice and freely, which it does. Spinning the oil pump. Cooking my gas. Next thing to do is to build up the clutch. So everything's just a bit loose just now. Right, first to go on is anti-judder, and then there's a special friction plate that goes on and fits over it, and then there's a sort of dished spring that goes on next like that, and then one of the plain plates. These have all basically been sitting in oil. Like that. So that basically moves freely, but that spring washer adds a bit of tension and stops the clutch juddering. Some of you may note that I'm not using new friction plates. I was going to, but I measured these and the measurements came out fine. And given I'm trying to keep costs down on this build, there's no reason to throw away a perfectly good clutch, frankly. Yes, you could argue that while I'm in here I might as well, but I could argue just as strongly that it's not necessary. So onto this goes that top bit, and then I'm also going to try and make sure that these are all aligned for when it gets slid into this bit. So thrust washer and my clutch basket, which I've assembled. A bit tricky to get this all to line up. That's us, all in position. And then we want a couple of springs and some washers just to hold this together while we fit it. So this is just temporary, and it will basically help while I'm putting the clutch onto the engine. Don't need to be tight, just need to hold it in place. So we've got a stepped washer to go on, and then a bush like that. And now the clutch can go on. The clutch has a gear at the back which is going to engage with my oil pump idler. So take a little bit of persuasion perhaps. There we go. So there's a dished washer that goes on now, quite clearly says outside on it. Doesn't take a genius to figure that one out. And then the clutch nut goes on as well. So the clutch needs to be locked so I can torque it up. Now that that's torqued up, I can take these temporary bolts and washers out. And as with all clutches, tightening the springs evenly, a little bit at a time, is the best way to do it to avoid any damage. Alright, we're getting there. Brand new cam chain. Over the crankshaft and onto the sprocket at the back. And once that's fitted, I can feed the oil pipe. Remember that pesky oil pipe that got trashed? Well, spare engines means spare parts. Reaping the rewards of that job lot again. I actually have 3 of those oil pipes, so let's blow this one out. So this oil pipe goes between the cam chain into here, like that. And that now means hopefully oil gets to the head, as it should. So that's good. Now that that's in, cam chain can just sit there. The next thing is the drive sprocket. The drive sprocket basically connects the crankshaft to the clutch, and it's got 2 flat splines in here which will line up with the pin. And then we need to jigger it about a little bit. It says That's it meshed with the clutch. So now you have drive from the crankshaft to the gearbox and vice versa. So next thing to fit is the Camchain tensioner. This is actually one of the spare ones I got in the spare parts because the other one had taken quite a bit of nasty damage at the lower end. I think, my theory is that the bolt that holds this on failed and it caused the Camchain tensioner to fail, the Camchain to go slack, causing the damage to the oil feed pipe, slapping about back here, causing the damage to the casing at the back, and all the metal that ended up in the oil was basically a result of that. So, that is my theory. What I'm going to do is fit this one because it's in much better condition, and hopefully if I do everything right that won't happen again. So we've got our little shouldered sleeve that goes into there. Oh dear. There's no thread in that hole. That is exactly what's happened. That bolt has come loose, rattled around, and then stripped the threads, come out, and the Camchain tensioner's failed. Oh, right. That's going to need a helicoil insert. Wish I'd noticed that earlier. Very important when doing a helicoil insert in an engine is to make sure that you get the tang that you use when you're inserting the helicoil. It's tiny, but it's steel. And if that goes into my oil pump that I've just refitted, it would make a heck of a mess. Anyway, get back to fitting the Camchain tensioner. Thank God for helicoils. That is tight. Right, next is the timing rotor, which engages onto that dowel. Then I've got a thrust washer, and a securing nut. And we'll torque this up too. Now I'm also going to put the oil filter screen in here. I gave it a very good clean, removed any of the debris that had got caught in it before. And that's nice and firm. And that's more or less the last of the components for this side of the engine. Alright, just spun the engine round 180 degrees. Got a little woodruff key here to fit into the end of the crank. Into there. Now these are huge magnets, so I've just had a really thorough look to see if there's any metal stuck to them that shouldn't be there. Because obviously now that I know that there's been metal in the oil, I want to make sure that I'm not just going to reintroduce the same problem. So, rotor's nice and clean. Slide it on. Make sure we're on the woodruff key. This has to go to 120 Newton meters. That's us. Alright, with the rotor torqued up, that's pretty much the bottom end of the engine together. Obviously there's the side cases to go on, but you know, they're just gaskets and bolts. I'm not going to put them on until I've got the top end together. Now on the top end, I'm still waiting on the barrel coming back from machining, so that's going to have to wait for another episode. Yeah, but good progress, good to get the bottom of the engine all back together, squared away, torqued up. Yeah, it's always a bit of a daunting task rebuilding the lower end of a bike engine, but just take your time and you get there in the end. A few different hurdles to overcome, and I think we managed relatively well. One thing, I'm annoyed at you all. You didn't remind me to put my safety glasses on. They're sitting on the bench as well, they're right in front of me. I have a mental block. Put your safety glasses on. Anyway, as usual, please do give me a like, leave me a comment, and make sure you do subscribe to the Shoogly Shed channel. I hope this has scratched an itch for a bit of an update. I know updates haven't been as frequent as they probably could be, but you know, waiting on the barrel coming back is holding this engine up. But if I don't get it back in the next few days, then maybe I'll start just stripping the bike down. The bike basically, well, my plan is to get the frame and a few other parts powder coated and get the engine into the frame when it's done, and then just start kind of restoring bits and bolting them on as and when they're done. Because it's not getting a lot of like custom modifications or anything like that, I'm quite happy just getting the frame powder coated, the engine in, and just start going, you know, building it outwards. Yeah, so hopefully once the engine is done and the frame's powder coated, it will start to pick up a bit of a pace, because I can get things done in the shed without needing to rely on outside agencies. Anyway, hope that's been enjoyable, quite in depth. If you're building an engine, maybe that gave you a bit of bit of help or inspiration as well. Yeah, take care. Goodbye. Oh shit.